Acting Deputy Commissioner Ronald Vitello. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before we start on the prototype information, I just want to say that at CBP, our thoughts and our prayers are with the folks that have been affected in Texas and the region in Hurricane Harvey. CBP is all in on response and recovery efforts. We're doing everything in our power to save people that are in harm's way. I'm very proud of the deployment that's down there, the Air and Marine officers, the Border Patrol agents, and the Customs and Border Protection officers that are there. And we're going to stay with the folks of that region until recovery starts. And so I want to praise them for the work that they've done so far, and just wanted to start there. Today we mark a significant milestone in CBP's implementation of the President's 25 January Executive Order on border security and immigration enforcement improvements, which among other things directs the Secretary of Homeland Security to take all appropriate steps to plan, design, and construct a physical wall along the southern border. I want to thank the people at DHS and CBP's leadership for their hard work on this. Our people in the procurement group, our facilities folks, our acquisitions professionals whose hard work got us here today. I want to thank the former Secretary Kelly, Acting Secretary Duke, and Acting Commissioner McAleenan to give us the time and the effort to get us to this milestone. On March 17, 2017, CBP issued 2 requests for proposals for prototype wall designs. Through the construction of prototypes, we are partnering with the industry to identify the best way to build new and replacement infrastructure along our border before we make further investments. The prototype approach reflects CBP's commitment to being good stewards of our funding resource. Specifically, CBP asked industry input for conceptual wall designs for reinforced concrete as well as alternative material, with the intent to construct multiple wall prototypes in the San Diego area. These prototypes, which are intended to deter illegal crossings, will help us refine the design standards and security requirements that will meet the needs of the U.S. Border Patrol. The prototypes and resulting wall infrastructure will complement the various other tools that we employ to secure our borders. These include sensors, physical barriers, lighting, all-weather roadways, cameras, towers, and other methods that we use to detect and deter illegal crossings into the United States. After a thorough review and evaluation, CBP has awarded prototype construction contracts for concrete designs for the following companies: Cadell Construction Company, LLC of Montgomery, Alabama; Fisher Sand and Gravel, doing business as Fisher Industries from Tempe, Arizona; Texas Sterling Construction Company, Houston, Texas; W.G. Yates and Sons Construction Company, Philadelphia, Mississippi. Awards for other than solid concrete prototypes are anticipated to be announced next week. In all, CBP expects to oversee the construction of 4 to 8 prototypes. Completion of the prototype construction is expected within 30 days after the issuance of the notice to proceed with construction. CBP's final selection of designs will take place after a thorough review and evaluation of the prototypes. Before I wrap, I want to emphasize that this prototype wall construction is part of a wide range of tools and technologies that we employ as part of a tremendously broad and far-reaching effort to secure the homeland. That effort and the mission depends on one thing: the continuing dedication and unwavering courage of the U.S. Border Patrol. These brave men and women have always been and will always be our nation's front line. We owe them a debt of gratitude for their commitment to protecting our country. I'd like to take your questions. I'm going to use the list I have here. Let's start with Steve Denon, Washington Times.
Can you say anything? So you have the money for these. Can you say anything about how big the prototypes are going to be, what the footprint is going to be, what your the testing is going to look like?
The prototypes are designed to be 30-foot long as well as up to 30 feet high. And they'll be in close proximity of each other, the 4 to 8 in the San Diego area. And then testing will look at things like the aesthetics of it, how penetrable they are, how resistant they are to tampering, and then scaling or anti-climb feature.
Can you give it the testing for breaching, I mean, are you gonna put explosives up against it? Are you gonna try and cut through it? What is that gonna look like?
The testing team will look at what some of the common things that we are challenged with now, small tools, hand tools. I don't think we're using any ballistic kind of things. How about Tracy Jan, Washington Post?
Yes, how much are these contracts and, what do they look like? Why were these companies selected?
So it comes through the regulations and the procurement process by the procurement professionals here at CBP. They've evaluated the proposals and selected these 4 companies based on their ability to meet the requirements in the request for proposal. And so the contracts range from just under $400,000 to just under $500,000. So there's a range between them, the average being about the $450,000 range.
Is that each?
For each section, yes. Those are the 4. Tal Capone, CNN.
Tal's not here, but I'm from CNN.
You're Greg?
He's at the interstate, Greg Wallace.
Please.
Yeah, so what can you tell us about the commonalities between these designs? I guess we'll see the designs soon. And what can you say about the designs that you didn't select? What made them insufficient for this?
So I can tell you in general terms what's on the request for proposal. I did not evaluate these proposals. We had another team that did that. But essentially, we're looking for a substantial border barrier. This particular set, and these awards have to do with concrete. So 30-foot tall, aesthetics, anti-climb features, and then we have them pay attention to how we would use technology in association with the barrier. It's one thing I want people to remember, that we're not just asking for a physical structure, we're asking for all the tools that help us secure the border.
Can you say what made the designs that you didn't choose? Did they not live up to those standards, or were the ones you picked better in some ways?
So in general terms, the ones that weren't selected didn't have enough of the requirements that were outlined in the proposal, and these were seen as better by the evaluation team. Ron Nixon, New York Times.
Yes, sir. You mentioned that this is the walls, but there are other tools. Could you talk about what those other things are in addition to?
So agents need this impedance and denial. It slows people from crossing the border. But they also need an enforcement zone, so they need access to the border. So that's all-weather roadways. And then they want detection. They want situational awareness. They want cameras and sensors that allow them to cue their own response so a law enforcement response can be had. So all those things have to be combined in the proper mix to make it work. Yeah, let's give a sense. We've got some illustrations of what the enforcement zone looks like. And so in simple terms, if this is the border, then you have a primary barrier here, you have an enforcement zone, and access on both sides, and then access to the border itself. So in its perfect form, that's what it looks like in sort of a semi-urban area. Let's look at the next. And then that's what it would look like in the rural, it's a rural enforcement zone. But you can see where these letters are. That's where, the illustrations for cameras, sensors, lighting, and then access is key. You've got to have agents on the ground in that space in order for it to be effective.
Just
Looks
back
like
to
there
the
are
urban
slats
area.
on those.
I'm sorry?
Would you go back to the urban area?
Sure.
It looks like there's slats on them. Or is that just?
So the primary enforcement, so this is the immediate border. Concrete's not appropriate for that particular location. So the concrete is used in this kind of secondary view. And this is just an illustration. It could look like that. It could be more solid. That's why we want to do the prototypes. It gets us to a place where we can compare. How about Kevin Johnson, USA Today?
Yeah, so, right here. So these 4 are not meant to, they will not be permanent, correct? I mean, you're just putting them up to test them and determine which one meets your needs, and then they'll be removed.
We have some options in the contract to do both. If they fit the space and they add to the infrastructure in San Diego in a beneficial way, we can keep them. If not, there's room in these contracts for them to be taken down or moved elsewhere. Geneva Sands?
In your view and with your experience, what do you think about these new prototypes will make them better than what exists already with any of the laws that are there?
Well, I think this versus some of the other projects that I've helped set requirements for, there's a more holistic view here. So the enforcement zone is sort of the primary laydown. That's kind of the base necessary. And then we've thought through on these action plans all of the equipment that the agents need. So this is a much safer environment than what we may have planned for before. The border changes. This is a much more substantial look at it. I think we've done better in that regard.
And this is what you want it to look like, ideally?
This is an ideal illustration.
Sorry, when you say ideal for the prototype, or this is what it would eventually look like if it was really put into
So in
place?
our action planning, this is our conceptualization of what an enforcement zone at the immediate border looks like. And so in an ideal situation, we would have the ability and the resources to build that kind of enforcement zone where it's necessary, not along the whole border, right? It's just where the requirements and the planners in the sectors have decided this is where impedance and denial makes a difference. And that's the kind of safety equipment and all the surrounding situational awareness features and access that's required.
Thank you. Given that President Trump has said that he wants a wall that you can see through and that that's essential so you know what's happening on the other side, then why is it worthwhile spending almost $2 million on prototypes for solid concrete walls?
So the initial border barrier, the stuff that's at the immediate border has to be see-through. That's the requirement that's outlined. And having an enforcement zone, that's one of the reasons we're doing prototypes, because we've not used concrete in this application before.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. I thought that the contracts you were awarding today were all for solid concrete.
They are.
So how do you see through solid concrete?
So that part of the proposals were to give us features, that see-through features. That's within the proposal. So we will see when they're built how they've addressed that. But again, we'll have cameras and sensors to know when there's activity. But just to be clear, the prototype will fit in this part of the configuration. So this is the border, this is the enforcement zone, and the prototype will be in this situation. So it's less important to see through this part, and it's vitally important to see the part that's at the immediate border.
So and that's Mexico on the top?
Yes.
And that wall right there is the see-through wall, is that?
At the immediate border, the
and
enforcement zone.
What's the design for that, or are there proposals to design that?
So that's already in the toolkit. Those is what we call PF2 or PF4 or something like that. It's this bollard fence. It's the fence that you see now, the newest of it, if you've been on the border in Arizona or some of the other places. So that's most appropriate for the immediate border.
So you're going to use the existing fence or immediate border, have a 150-foot enforcement zone, and then potentially a concrete wall.
Depending on how the
Yeah.
prototypes come out, yep. There's still a lot to do, right? We're going to build 4 prototypes for concrete, and then we're going to build 4 other materials, and then we're going to make decisions about which is most appropriate for which location.
How many different types of barriers do you expect to have, and will any of them have lethal enforcement measures for potential crossers?
There's nothing lethal in this, and we're going to build 4 to 8 prototypes, depending on how the other materials awards go.
How many do you expect to ultimately use in different terrains and so on?
It'll depend on what the industry brings forward. We're going to use all the things that we think work the best. So we'll see what kind of innovation comes with the other materials, and we'll see how the prototypes of concrete allow for this kind of application, and it'll be based on the evaluation and testing, and then agent experience, et cetera, to kind of select which is most appropriate where.
Hi, thank you. I'm Luis Alonso with EAP. Just to clarify, when you say that you expect 4 to 8 prototypes, will be 4 for the concrete and 4 for the
Other
see-through.
materials, correct.
And each of these vendors will do 1 prototype each. You mentioned 4 vendors.
So these 4 have been selected under the concrete request for proposal,
Right, they'll do 1 prototype each of them.
unless they're bidding on the other ones
They
as
could-
well. They could be in both.
And just to understand, so this means that you have narrowed down the search to these 4 prototypes, and then you could end up picking 4 of them, or only 1, or none of them, depends on the results.
Yeah, picking depends on the evaluation.
But it could be 0 to 4, all the options,
It could be 0 to 8.
or to 8. Thank you.
Chief, I'm sorry. Just quickly, Just to understand, you said 4 to 8, so each company will build 1 or 2?
These companies that we've named today will build one each.
One each, okay.
And then there's another announcement we will have for awards
the other-
for the other material.
Gotcha, okay.
Paying for this wall has been the subject of much debate. How much consideration in selecting these companies was given to what they could actually build these prototypes for, or what they would cost per foot in actual construction?
So I'm not sure I understand the question. We've looked at all the feasibility for construction. So this requirement comes from agent level resources, right? Planners and leadership in the field that said, in these locations, we want the enforcement zone, we want border wall here. So we've looked at our own ability to say, well, can it be constructed here? What are the requirements? Can you access the land? Do we have other access? Can you put the other pieces of equipment to go along with it?
What about, like, this proposal would cost us $1 million a mile, and this proposal would cost us $10 million a mile? Was that part of the assessing of these proposals?
So cost is part of it, and their ability to perform. There's lots of parts of the evaluation. I'm not an evaluator. I'm not a procurement expert. Our job in the Border Patrol and now as leadership is to select the companies that we think give us the best value for what our requirement says, what our proposals came with.
Chief, can I?
Thank you. You said the completion of the prototype will occur 30 days from the issuance of a notice to proceed. Can you give us some plain language on just how soon we can expect to see a finished product?
So the next step with these companies is to sit down and discuss timing and access and all of the kinds of things that get them ready to do construction. And then we will mutually agree on a date for them to proceed, and then we'll give them a notice, and then they'll have 30 days to perform
So are
under
we
that.
talking months, a year?
A couple of weeks,
A couple
of weeks,
couple
depending on schedules and et cetera.
And then at the top, you talked about this being a significant milestone in implementing the president's executive order. For an average voter who thinks, I voted for the president for the wall, you know, you're calling this a significant milestone. Just how much does this step represent progress towards what the president talked about?
Well, this is the first tangible result of the action planning that has gone on. But we did get, so this is the use of the resources that we had available for this year. And then there are other plans underway for other segments. And so we'll learn from this to plug into those segments. And then there's some other work to replace fencing in other parts of the border, including putting gates up in the Rio Grande Valley. So this is the first new initiative that adds to our bigger plans.
You said that there was another group who actually did the evaluation of the prototypes. Which group is that?
A procurement group here at CBP, they're in enterprise services. They're experts in acquisition and evaluations.
And is this procedure that you've come up with so far the most efficient, cost-effective way of going forward?
So we looked at all the costs involved, and then there's also like a value assessment that's underway as well.
I don't quite understand. Can you?
So cost gets us to estimates to make requests for additional funding. So we've looked at all the costs that are involved.
Was this the most efficient way to move forward?
This meets the requirement. So the proposal was written based on requirements that the people on the ground said they needed. The folks that are in this contracting now have met the requirements that are in the proposal.
So all of the concrete fencing that you're talking about will be on that secondary line,
Correct.
is that right?
Correct.
So inland from the border.
That's right.
Can I follow up on that, Chief? Were the other materials, are those also only secondary fencing, or are you considering those for the primary level layer?
It'll be based on the evaluation. We'll see what industry brings. We have no idea what those other materials are, so we'll see if it's appropriate for them to be in both locations.
Why is concrete only appropriate for secondary? Because of that see-through aspect?
That and its durability at the immediate border. We need to be on both sides of a structure that's not see-through and that's right up against the line.
Follow-up. How long will be the evaluation of these prototypes? How long will it take the evaluation?
There's a testing regime in place, and I think it's between 30 and 60 days of evaluation.
In terms of cost, you said these cost about $400,000 to $500,000 each, and you said they were 30 feet. So you're talking about what, $12,000 to $15,000 per foot. Is the cost of the prototype going to be the same as the cost of the actual finished product?
No, it's because where we put it really matters. How we have to, if we have to acquire land, et cetera. There's a lot more that goes into it beyond the cost of these. I would not take what these 30-foot segments cost or the contract award and try to extrapolate it. That won't get you to the right number. That's not how we do it either. It depends on where they go. The blue?
The process of notifying these vendors and choosing them had been delayed several times, and I'm just wondering if you can touch on what measures have been put into place to ensure that, you know, from here on out, this process isn't going to continue to see these constant delays. I mean, you know, I believe that CBP had put out a statement in May saying that they wanted to start construction on these in June. We're now entering September, so has there been any discussion on moving forward and making sure that this is something that's being done in a timely fashion? And
We're fully committed to doing it the right way as quickly as possible, but there are things that cause delays, and then this last delay was based on a protest that another contractor had that was cleared by GAO. So that was the latest requirement for delay.
now that you selected these 4 vendors, can others who were not chosen file protests as well?
I believe so.
Okay, and how long would that create in terms of the delay? There are, you know, is a flood of protests.
There are procedural timelines that I'm just not expert in. This last one took 60 days to clear.
And Congress already approved funds for these prototypes?
So the prototypes are with FY17
Yes.
appropriations, yes.
Do you know how much, like, for these concrete wall prototypes, do you know, like, what percentage of the order you expect to put the concrete, or not the prototypes, but the actual wall?
So we have a general sense of requirements in each of the locations, and we have our own priorities for those requirements. And so, dependent on the valuation, like what we say and how the testing comes out, then we can decide where it'll go.
So you don't know yet, though, what percentage you plan on doing
The
the
type and the
concrete
amount.
versus the other than concrete?
Right, so the type and the amount depends on our own evaluations.
And when do you expect to have those evaluations done?
Approximately 2 months after the building is completed, after construction is completed.
Okay, and you said that there is, there's a certain date from which they have 30 days to complete the prototypes?
There's a formal process in the contract called notice to proceed to construction. Once they have that notice officially from the government, they'll have 30 days to
Okay,
perform.
so when are they expected to get that notice?
After we discuss schedules and decide on a mutually understood date.
I have one question over here. I'm sorry if you already answered this, but as part of these prototypes, they include the sensors that you're looking for?
In the proposal, we asked them to pay attention in their descriptions to how technology could be composited within these prototypes. So things like conduits, things like you know, camera mounts, those kinds of things were part of their proposals, but they won't have the actual equipment in them.
Understood. Thank you. We have time for one more question.
Go ahead.
Kind of get a 2-part question. One is, well, that's the timeline. I don't know if you addressed that. I know it's been pushed back to winter. Do you have a solid idea of when they'll start building, when they'll finish? I don't know if I missed that somehow. And then 2, do any of these companies have experience building something like a border wall?
I don't know the backgrounds of the companies. We're going to do this as quickly as we can while maintaining all the requirements that we have. So we want to do it as fast as possible. We think it's in a couple of weeks to get started.
All right, thanks, everybody. If you have additional questions, I'd be happy to follow up with you. Yes.
Thank you. Déjame un minuto.
I'm going to stay here.